Okay, we are recording. Thanks so much, Erica. Take it away.
Thank you. So I think we'll start with the team introducing ourselves. So we've got here the majority of the research group team who are working on the Alexander Studies Online project. So you know me now. There's Charlotte, Leslie, and Emma, who's a colleague of Leslie's, who will introduce themselves in a minute. But the kind of backroom people on this call are Mark, who you've heard from, who's hosting at the moment, there he is, over in Canada, and Julia Woodman, who is the chair of the research group, and she's going to take over the hosting when Mark has to go and do some work. And yeah, so we'll hopefully see you through the hour and keep things running smoothly. That's the plan anyway. Before we do the other thing I want to say before we do the introductions is that the idea of this, it's called a question and answer session, but it would be really nice if because you guys have all got experience of this, working with dementia, or you know people with dementia, or whatever it is, and we would like to hear from you. But obviously if you've got lots of questions for Charlotte, Leslie and Emma, then that's fab. So we're going to sort of throw this open partway through to a discussion, and when that happens depends on how many questions there are. So if we kind of, you know, it looks like there's becoming more comments than questions, then we will turn it into more of a discussion. But what I'd like you to do is to put your questions and or comments in the chat box. So again, most of us have done Zoom till we're blue in the face at these days, but if you move your cursor on the screen and there's a chat thing, you click on that and the chat box comes up, and you can then, where it says type message here, you can type a message, a question, and you can decide who it goes to. So if you send it to everyone, then everyone can see your message, and they'll also be able to see if I fail to pick it up and ask you to say your question. So is that okay if everyone thumbs up, if you know where the chat box is, and all good? Splendid. Right, so perhaps Charlotte, would you like to introduce yourself, and then we'll move on to Leslie and then Emma.
Okay, fine. Yeah, well, I'm Charlotte Woods, and I, as Erica said, I'm a member of the STAT research group. So I've been involved in this kind of relaunch of the Alexander Studies Online. And I'm a retired lecturer, university lecturer, and I am a trained Alexander teacher, trained primarily by Malcolm Williamson. I'm very happy to see you here this evening, Malcolm. And I have a mother with dementia, and that's how I got interested in working with people with dementia using the Alexander technique. And some of you may have seen the videos online where I talk about a small project I did at my mum's care home. Right? That's me, really.
Leslie.
So I'm Leslie Glover. I'm also a member of the STAT research group and an Alexander teacher. I'm as well a clinical psychologist, and I work at the University of Hull, where I've done some research with older people and the Alexander technique. And I really got interested in working in the area of dementia through working with Emma, who you'll meet in 1 minute. And I've been involved in the survey of Alexander teachers, which I hope some of you will have taken part in, and there have been some videos on that as well. That's me.
And finally, and but not least, Emma.
Hello, good evening and morning, wherever we are. My name's Emma Wolverton. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I work with people living with dementia. I've always worked with people with dementia since I qualified, so I've worked right across the dementia care pathway. So started off working in memory clinics and supporting people and their families at the point of diagnosis, right through to working in care homes for a while, and now I work right at the opposite end of the dementia journey with people who are coming to the end of their lives in our acute hospital, our mental health inpatient unit, and our hospice. And I also am the programme director for our master's programme in dementia at the University of Hull. I came to know about the Alexander techniques through working with Leslie at the university and thinking, what does this woman do that she always looks so calm and relaxed? I need to do some of that. My first experience of the Alexander technique as a pupil was when I was pregnant and having some difficulties with a very large baby. And that's how I sort of became interested and wondered what this might offer for people living with dementia. So that's me.
Great, thank you very much. So I thought we're going to start, if this is okay with you guys, with it's not exactly a question, but it's something that sort of goes to the heart of dementia and how we perceive it, and yeah, the word dementia, and it just the way most people see or think of dementia, it just doesn't sound like a really good word. It sort of means insanity and madness, and from it it sort of instills fear in people. So I'm just wondering, the panel of Charlotte, Leslie, and Emma, what do you think about that? It's kind of, you know, discuss the word dementia. What does it mean, and why? How could we change it some way? Because it just sounds so awful. So I don't mind how you sort of take that on, but if you if you'd like to just kind of, you know, set the scene with this word. What's it about?
I don't know if anyone else reads Harry Potter other than me.
Yeah, exactly.
But to quote Hermione, fear of a name only increases fear of the thing itself. It's the old Voldemort paradox, isn't it? He who should not be named. Yeah, well, the research tells us that dementia is the most feared diagnosis amongst older people across the globe. And, you know, most people now have experience of dementia because people are living longer, and the biggest risk factor is just old age. So I think it's something that's in the public awareness more. It is hugely stigmatized. There's such a lot of fear. I think it's where illnesses like AIDS and cancer were, you know, a really long time ago, that you know, people wouldn't even speak of it. My professional opinion is to say the word and to show that I'm not frightened of it, and I don't think people should be ashamed or embarrassed, just as I wouldn't not say cancer or any other life-limiting illness. If a person doesn't choose to use that word, then I'll adopt the language that they use. But I think it's really important that I show that, you know, I wouldn't be frightened of that word. So I will use it with people if they're comfortable using it.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And I was thinking myself about the idea of cancer when I was a child. You know, people talked about it in hushed tones, and more recently, mental illness. People didn't talk about having depression or things like that. Whereas there's much more openness, much more acceptance, and it's only through challenging some of the misconceptions that underpin the stigma, if you like, that people began to fear the idea less. So I think, you know, that's what we have to do really, is to keep challenging some of those underlying misconceptions and use a word as you're saying without fear. And
yeah, I'd agree entirely. It's not the name, it's what's attached to the name. So if you change what's attached to the name, then the name becomes irrelevant in a way. And I think that's the important part.
I think there's still such a lot of misunderstanding, isn't there? So most people still don't realise that dementia is a life-limiting illness, you know, and that people will die with it. That is just not in the public conception, isn't it? And people think memory loss and confusion, but they don't think, you know, of all the motor problems, the swallowing problems. They don't think of, you know, the kind of perceptual problems, the hallucinations. All of these symptoms are still not regularly associated with dementia either. So there's a real way to go, I think, in educating the public, and there are huge kind of cultural differences in that as well, you know, that make it a bit trickier because the word means lots of different things. So on our master's program, it's an international program, and we have a student from China who was telling us that when you are diagnosed with dementia in China, you immediately lose your driving license, you have to give up work, and you lose your passport. So that's not going to make you want to go and get a diagnosis, is it? And obviously, you know, the implications of that are huge. So yeah, we get a lot of this. Yeah.
The other thing is that the thing people don't associate with dementia is people, you know, living well, having a good quality of life for some of the time. You know, the positive things are very much missing. So it's kind of misunderstood or not understood from all angles. The scope of it, the kind of issues people might have aren't understood, but nor are the possibility of positives, the possibility of people making different decisions and, you know, choosing ways to live their lives. And I'm not saying it's a walk in the park. That's not what I mean at all. But, you know, out of challenges can come more positive things as well.
Yeah, I think one of the problems with the stigma is that it makes people with dementia marginalized. So people will tend to sort of put them out of sight or keep them out of sight or keep them out of mind and not involve them in decisions that affect them and things like that. So they become marginalized. So along with that stigma, there's all sorts of consequences as well. So yes, lifting some of that stigma and thinking about the more positive aspects that will certainly help with that.
And maybe if we bring it back to Alexander technique, that's accepting or being open to the fact that something like Alexander technique can change things for people, can be positive, can make a difference. It's not a one-way street that, you know, there's no way to change in. So, yeah.
That leads very nicely, thanks guys, that leads very nicely on to Fred Schofield's question that he's kindly put in the chat. Fred, do you want to unmute yourself and sort of talk about your question or your background to it?
Yes. Both my parents were in a care home. One had dementia, the other had Alzheimer's. Not exactly sure what the difference is. Alzheimer's more to do with memory as far as I know, but anyway. And there are quite a few issues. Some of the staff had a real natural touch with people in this condition. And I know it's probably very difficult to recruit care home staff anyway, especially these days. But some of them didn't, and there was one in particular in a senior position who seemed to get very frustrated and annoyed. So that was one issue, but I think it probably linked to the question if the people in the care home weren't just sitting around like cabbages, then the staff would be able to engage more with them, even give them possibly, you know, some of the least affected ones jobs in the kitchen, or finding out what their interests are. It will be a good thing. What made me start thinking about this was about probably 9 or 10 years ago. There was a TV program by this entrepreneur. I think he was called Jerry Luce or something. People might have heard of him. I don't know anything else about him, but his father had died of dementia in a care home. So he set about looking for a care home that would give people, make the residents more engaged with things. One guy loved painting sheds, so he spent his life painting sheds. And you know, some people did help in the kitchen, and they were all doing something and lived more fulfilled lives and looked more like normal people. And I think it was easier, from what I remember, for others to communicate with them, or even to communicate with themselves. But he found one home out of I don't know how many. I can't remember how many he visited. And so he set up a meeting with the staff of this home with the staff of another home where this didn't happen, and the backs were up against the wall immediately. They didn't really, they said, oh no, we can't possibly do that, you know, the way things are. So I suppose the question is, could the Alexander technique help care home staff to see that it would be possible to engage them more and do everything in a different, more creative, more fulfilling way for everybody? And the results of Charlotte's pilot project seem to suggest that that could be highly possible.
Yeah, I think there are various, you've raised a lot of issues and given some really interesting background. And I think the issue you raise is a very important one. I think, and I mean, you've got the fact that staff differ hugely, and that's right. Some have got a natural gift, some maybe less so, but I think just doing a bit of Alexander technique with the staff that I work with certainly helped them to act in a more empathetic way and to be less reactive to the sort of emotions of the residents that they found difficult and that kind of thing. So I think it can help in that way, certainly, to make, you know, help staff who perhaps are less naturally gifted to be better in their interactions with the residents. In terms of activities, I think most homes have organised activities, but sometimes not everyone will be involved, and some residents don't necessarily like being in the communal areas. They rather be on their own, just as, you know, people who don't have dementia, some are more sociable than others and whatnot. So their sort of blanket response, if there's anything that's organised in the lounge, they'll say, well, you know, I don't want to do it, you know, and they won't want to join in. So I think the staff could be trained sort of a couple of things, not to react. So if the person says, no, I'm not doing that, you know, go away, or word to that effect, expletive, then they sort of say, okay, fine, and they go off and go and find another resident and take them into the lounge for the activity. But then they go back, by which time maybe the idea is percolated through because the brain's processing this idea of bingo, you know, or whatever is going on in the lounge. And you say, well, do you know, I've just heard they're doing bingo in the lounge, and it looks kind of fun. I fancy going. Do you fancy coming with me? And you try a different approach. So not to take the first answer, not reacting just to that no, that would be one thing. I think there's a huge amount can be done one-to-one with an Alexander teacher or any member of staff who's maybe had a bit of training about giving options for that one-to-one and how to approach the person. And I think there's a huge amount for meaningful communication just within the kind of general personal care routines. So even, you know, so you're escorting the person to the dining room, and while you're escorting them, you give them an arm, you're thinking into your back, you're thinking your Alexander thoughts, and as you're walking with the person, you're not just thinking, right, I've got to get you into the dining room, but you're actually engaging with a person saying, oh, that's a nice picture, I've not noticed that before, or that's a pretty blouse you're wearing today, or do you know what I mean? Just kind of, there's opportunities for meaningful conversation and for giving options and giving agency to the residents in that kind of routine care that doesn't always happen because the staff will be so focused on getting the thing done that they forget about the person that they're with. And what you want is a much greater sense of mutuality and both the resident and the carer being involved in that activity. So I think there's all kinds of ways that a bit of Alexander technique could help carers to improve and involve the residents in more meaningful communication in various ways. So those are some initial thoughts, but I'm sure Emma and Leslie have got other ideas around that.
Did you, just before they come in, did you, thanks Annie, did you, when you worked with the carers, Charlotte, did you see a change in their attitude as well? I know that, you know, we're not
Absolutely, absolutely. A very, very marked change. A couple of the bits of data that I put up, you know, one of them said, you know, there was this woman that she worked with she was the main carer for this woman who was quite difficult, and she would often spit and she'd strike the carer, and she was, you know, get quite aggressive. And I know the carer got very, very anxious when she had to deal with this woman, and she sort of said, you know, when I approach her, I do my thinking, and I think, you know, and I calm myself down, and it's much better for me and it's much better for her. They were her words. Another one was, you know, she became much softer in her tone, less aggressive, less kind of bossy, you know. So yeah, they had very, very real changes in their behavior and the way they work with residents. Yeah.
So just, sorry, me, because I'm unmuted. Do you feel was it easier, do you think, if we're, as Alexander teachers, wanting to go into care homes, would it be easier to sell working with the carers or with the residents? Because it may be they're a bit more overprotective of the residents, but actually if we work with the carers, we might actually achieve quite a lot.
Yeah, I think you could have an impact both ways. I was quite keen to do both things, and the management were all right with that. But yeah, I'm sure you could sell it as working with carers, and I think that would also benefit the residents for the, you know, the reasons that we're talking about now. Definitely, it could have an impact on the residents, improve their lives, improve the emotional temperature of the home, bring that down. You know, less stress, less anxiety, less anger, less, you know, all that kind of thing. Visitors as well, who are often very, very stressed elderly, you know, make them feel calmer and more in control, and, you know, happier, and yeah, all sorts of ways that you could support people. Yeah, but I think it would be a real missed opportunity not to work with residents, because some of them really don't have much in the way of activities, and just having that opportunity to be with someone who doesn't make demands on them, or is not trying to get them dressed or whatever, just to be with them is very valuable.
Leslie or Emma, do you want to speak to this one?
Yeah, I think we always say, if you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia, and that's absolutely true. You know, there are no two people alike, and it's exactly the same with care homes. There are no two care homes alike, and some care homes are, you know, are all based around activity, and some are all based around keeping people safe and clean, you know. And you will find, and some care homes work for some people, and, you know, I'm often asked if I can recommend care homes because I spend a lot of time in them, and I'll say absolutely not, because the care home that would suit me would be my husband's idea of hell. You know, they're all very different, and everyone's needs are very different. I think we have to think about what we mean about activity in dementia as well, because that's very different. So I think in the Alexander technique, you talk about flexibility, don't you? Being flexible. In dementia care, we talk about winging it. You cannot plan an activity in dementia care and sit everyone down and, you know, and from start to finish for an hour. It does not work like that. You go with the moment, you go with the person. Sometimes you're on a bus, sometimes you're on a train, sometimes you thought you were going to have a shower and you end up having a bath that lasts 3 hours, and you've got the music on and you're singing opera. You know, the idea that you plan activity, it just doesn't happen. You can't plan an hour's bingo on a Tuesday at 2 o'clock. You know, that's not good practice. It's about responding to people where they are and in those moments, isn't it? So I think you have to think about what we mean by activity. But the other issue is that studies have shown that the average person in a care home gets 4 minutes of conversation a day. So there's no wonder that most people die within 18 months of going into care, because that has a massive impact on people's well-being, obviously. So there is actually just something about listening to people and being with people. There's also a lot of research that shows that the more external people that come into a care home, so, you know, your pat dogs and your hairdressers and your Alexander technicians, the more external people that come in, the safer that care home is. That lay observer role, that just being there, that asking the questions, why has that lady got no blouse on? Why is that man saying he's really thirsty? Those obvious questions that you come in and ask can save people's lives. You know, so that is, and that's a worry at the moment with COVID, obviously, because people aren't going into care homes. So that just being there will make a difference to people's lives, and asking those really obvious questions And I think for me, there's a huge role in legitimizing touch, giving people permission to touch at the moment, particularly with COVID, is huge in care homes as well. But I think that you know, it's massive, and that is really important. So just there's a lot of modelling that we do as well, and just humanising people in the questions that we ask as well. I think that's really nice. I don't know if I've gone off topic too much, sorry. Leslie.
I was really just going to say that I think connecting with people is, yeah, it's not even just conversation, it's connection at any level where you are responding to the person in front of you as a person, whether that be in silence or in conversation. I don't know that matters. And I think Alexander's touch is hugely important, but just someone using Alexander directions can make a very big difference. And I've noticed lots of hands going up, and I'm very intrigued to hear what people have to say. Yeah. So I wonder if we could hear from the various people who put hands up.
Yeah, there's Louise has said she would like to share something. So Louise, would you like to unmute yourself?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm from Quebec. I live near Montreal, and I want to talk about my experience. My mother is in a residential home. She's been there for 4 years now, and all the what I've been observing since she's there, it's a semi-autonomous home. And it's a semi-private. And there's a nice model. They've got all these kind of things. So the staff, there's a lot of very good modeling of how to bring the best of living in a residential home. The reality in Quebec anyway, the reality in Quebec is that it's always short of staff. And as Fred said, you know, there's some people that have the touch, you know, or the way to do, but there's a lot of people that just don't have this kind of naturally. And what I see is that it's all kind of an ideal world, that all these ideas are, but the actual reality at the moment is that it's always short of staff, lack of finances to support these kind of things, although it's all written in the book as possibility. The way also in residential home that we have that are kind of growing here in Quebec, it's like a real kind of business type of seems to talk about like an ideal thing, but it's like it's in the books, you know, and in the practice it's very difficult to imply. I mentioned when I was in contact with, I think, Charlotte, or I think about this, there's one home in Quebec called Carpe Diem, and that has a beautiful kind of different approach to dementia, to welcoming people living with dementia. And I think there's another one in France. I think I sent the link. I mean, this is the ideal. Yeah. Anyway, I wanted to share that there's a reality that is to work with the staff. They're always running. What I've seen is they're always running. And sometimes, you know, they just can do what they can do. And so that's a reality that I'd like to bring up. Anyway, here in Quebec, I'm not saying it's all the home because I haven't visited all of them, but I have the impression that the home where my mother is a pretty good representation of what is happening at large.
Yeah. I think it's certainly the case that staff are always going to be rushed off their feet. They're always going to be busy. But I think, and you know, there's no easy answer. A question of finance and staffing and all the rest of it. But sometimes the kind of approach where you're empathetic and you're having meaningful contact is not about time, and sometimes it actually saves time, I feel, by giving the person time to sort of to move at their pace and all the rest of it. Sometimes the rushing actually takes more time, I think, or the extra forcing. So sometimes that kind of keeping back into yourself and going at the person's pace actually ends up being faster. I don't think they save time through rushing, and I think it's that idea of through the technique learning to allow certain things to take time, and the fact that you have to allow for that, and it won't necessarily mean that you take longer overall. Yeah. It's a kind of a different attitude to time, isn't it? And
well, just to for that, for me, this experience is more of a learning experience for myself than it reveals a lot of things about myself, and so it's I think that to just be able to watch it, you know, and to come back to myself, and then my immediate reaction to a certain because it can't be when I go there, you know, I can't kind of like well, I want to do this and that. It's just like I have to stop, and then it's like a very strong stimulus. To bring up all my usual reaction, you know, it's just like it's quite a strong, for me, it's a strong learning experience, I must say.
No question. Yeah.
Thank you, Louise. That's yeah, really interesting. Annie, did you want to say something about the book that you've mentioned on the thing? You can unmute yourself.
My husband's aunt was in a care home for 4 years with Alzheimer's, and we brought her up from London to Leeds, and I used to visit her about 4 times a week. And I asked them to do Alexander Technique, and they said no. And I actually slid Alexander Technique laterally by not calling it that. And then basically the Contented Dementia book is written by an expert in dementia who's never done Alexander Technique, but it's got a lot of Alexandrian ideas. The main one being that people with dementia, even if they don't know who you are, they need to be in the green zone rather than red zone. The green zone is a sense of safety. The red zone is anxiety, because there's a sense of unknown. So even if somebody doesn't know me, they can feel safe. And I taught the staff for my family member, I taught them the difference between open and closed questioning and saying open and closed questioning is useless with her. If you say we're going to go and listen to Chris, the guitarist, she'll say no. It's exactly what Charlotte was saying. So you don't need to label some of the work that we do. Alexander work is actually doesn't have to have that label, and that's a bit sad, but the only way I had success in the home was removing the label of Alexander Technique, and just because I was a regular visitor, introducing some ideas that were Alexandrian, but they didn't have that label. And there's a lot of good practice, and there's some people, and Charlotte's absolutely right, there was a carer, and my relative's called Cora, who was absolutely superb with her. And she would run, if I arrived, I could see her sometimes, she'd run along the corridor, and then she'd go into the room very slowly and calmly. She'd do the toileting or get them dressed or whatever. And she'd do it in a really beautiful way. And she didn't actually lose time, that's the point. So this myth of rushing around needs to be unlearned, actually, because the person feels calm. And the other thing is to teach people to think about things differently, because there used to be a cafe there, We used to go and play dominoes with some people, and it was a very eccentric dominoes. Or, for example, a guy called Eddie used to come and play, and sometimes I'd have 4 of them. And this guy, I said, "Have you got a 1, Eddie?" He said, "Yes." And he had a double blank, and he thought the line down the middle was a 1, and then he put it in the wrong angle. But what's interesting is I was thinking, oh, that's wrong, and then I thought, it doesn't matter. Of course, it doesn't matter. We can have diagonal. We can have anything we like. We're just engaging and having fun. Mm. So the interesting thing is the snakes and ladders is very good fun with people with dementia. But the interesting thing about it is for the person who's working with them not to be constrained by how you should play dominoes or how you should arrange flowers. And as Emma was saying, I mean, I used to arrange flowers with my relative and it used to take us an hour, because it was the whole thing, but it doesn't matter. And she'd be cutting things off and it would look a mess and everything. And because I was a relative, they were quite happy for her to use scissors in my presence. And it's about them being relaxed and having the fun. But what I'd also say is that I'd had enough after an hour and a half. And there's no way I could look after a relative with dementia 24/7. And people used to say how brilliant I was with her, but I was only doing 4 to 6 hours a week. And that I think that's quite an important point. And also the other point is I used to go at different times. They never knew when I was going to arrive. So that idea of external people coming in is really important. But there's lots of very, very empowering, wonderful things that happen with the right attitude. And the last thing is that when my relative couldn't remember my name, and I arrived one day and she said to a carer who was doing something, she said, "Hello, dear." And then she turned to the carer and she said, "Have you met my lovely friend?" Oh. She didn't know who I was, my name, but she knew I was safe. She knew she was going to have a nice hour, and it didn't matter at all. That was the nicest thing in the whole journey, that even though she'd forgotten that. And the best thing was, because we only have one car, my husband picked me up when I'd gone on the bus there, and he came into the room and she said to him, "Have you met this lovely woman?" And we've been together for 28 years. "Have you met this lovely woman?" But the whole thing about it is the carer's attitude. But what I'm saying is it's much wider than Alexander. We've got a huge amount to offer dementia world, but I think we can sneak in through other routes rather than, because we're not very good at getting work. Well, I'm not anyway. but the skills can be used. That's what I'm saying. Really.
And I think you're absolutely right. And yeah, sorry, I was going to say I think you made some really important points there, and I think I'm cautious about the idea that there are good and bad carers, because there just aren't. There are some carers that are burnt out and exhausted and not paid enough, definitely. But I think because we're all different, we will all respond differently to different approaches to care, won't we? And that's exactly what happens. So it's the match of the person and the carer. So some carers just click with some people and that works so well, and some just doesn't. Like we had a lady today on the ward who is diabetic and wanted a pudding and was furious that she wasn't allowed this sugary chocolatey pudding. And one of the staff, who is lovely, fantastic member of staff, really skilled, was saying, unfortunately, you weren't managing your diabetes before you came into hospital. You've been really poorly. That pudding's got lots of sugar in. I'm really sorry. You could have this, and it was just too much information. It was too much information, meant from the most loving place. And one of the nurses came in and went, "You're diabetic. You're not having a pudding. This is your pudding." And she went, "Oh, okay." Just and whereas that nurse, because she's very nursey and matronly, this lady just responded to it. This lady has worked as a nurse. The matron came in, she did what the matron said, you know, and that's what she responds to. And so there are some people where we know we have to be really boundaried and quite authoritarian, and others where we know we need to be really gentle. And so the skill is in adapting, just like you would when you're working with someone. It's not, I don't know that you have it or you don't, although some people just seem to have that extra bit of sparkle or magic, but I think it's about the ability to read a person and adapt to what they need at that time, and know when you can push someone and know when you need to back away. That's the skill set of a carer, being a bit of a chameleon and adapting yourself to the person, and knowing when it's time to back off and when you can push someone that little bit more. Which is the skill set of an Alexander technique teacher in my eyes as well. Adapting and reading people and knowing, you know, where people are in that moment. And
yeah. Thank you. Uli, you wanted to say something. You can unmute yourself. Oh, unmute.
Can you unmute?
That's it, I think. Are you on? No.
No.
Julia, can you
your
unmute
microphone?
No, I can only ask people to unmute. I can't actually physically unmute them. You just need to press. Can you see the microphone on the bottom left corner of your screen? And you click that.
You click.
You just hang on.
Can you do it, Erica? No.
I don't think I can. I thought that Julia could.
The host should be able to. If you hover over as a host.
Yeah, I can only ask to unmute. I can't actually unmute.
Oh.
Can you not? No.
Not anymore. You used to be able to, but I don't think you can anymore.
Can't hear you, Uli. Can you type?
Es geht nicht. Ah, yes.
Ah, good.
Usually I know how to manage that, but it didn't work in the beginning. So.
All good. Carry on.
Yeah. I would like to say something, because I was working about 12 years with dementia people. And I had the experience that I think the most important principle is inhibition in that work. So the inhibition for myself, you know, that I really stop and that I really be aware of what I'm doing and what I'm thinking, because these persons are so sensitive that they react immediately. If I'm not clear what I want to say and what I want to do and how I am there, they react immediately. And sometimes it may be that they get aggressive or they just react to something. That was my impression sometimes, something which is around me, where I am not clear about it, what my thoughts are, something like that. And so they start to react to me. So it was really, really a good kind of mirror for myself to really to watch out. What do I say? What do I think? What is my energy around myself?
Yeah.
And in the beginning, the idea was that the owner of this old people's home said to me, I can work with one of his employees each month. He would pay them an hour with work with me. Well, I'm Alexander teacher, trainee, and so on in Hamburg. But the people avoid. They didn't say that they didn't want. They didn't take the chance to do it. So then I thought maybe then I work with the old people, so with the dementia people. And so I started the work, and that was about, 12 years I worked with them. And and they engaged me, they paid me, and the owners of this home changed. It has been, I think, 5 owners in that times. But each of one saw what I did and said, well, we let her there because what she is doing is fine. We don't understand it, but we see what is happening is fine. And yeah, I work with dance and I touch the people, and I work with direction, with inhibition and direction. I touch the people, I move the people, and yeah, developed a kind of style or kind of work during these years. And it was really very, very, very interesting and very touching and very rich work. Well, for myself also, it was a very rich work to do that. And my mother was there in this old people's home. And yeah, I spent years with her, and the good point was that I could develop a kind of closeness to her, which I wouldn't have could develop when she has been, if she would have been in her usual healthy state. It was a little bit strange. But there was such a chance in this illness for contact, and closeness and warmness and heart opening. So yeah, it was a very rich time to do that.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
I think what you say about clarity is really interesting, because I think one of the things, particularly going on for staff, but for other people in a care home situation, is just how little clarity there is for a lot of people a lot of the time. And I think maybe we're not really aware of that, but you know, people have a lot going on, there are lots of demands, and actually when they're with people, that kind of lack of clarity and possibly lack of authenticity, lack of actually just being themselves with the person, creates confusion, particularly for people who have something like dementia, where, you know, the world is that much more confusing anyway. And I think that's a really important, interesting point, that the clearer you are, the more present you are, the more in yourself you are, then the easier it is for people to connect, because it's a kind of direct person-to-person connection without, you know, all the muddle or confusion or demands. I don't know. Does that make sense? There's something about that clarity that I think is really important.
Yeah. I think that's really important after people get their diagnosis initially as well. I mean, we're talking a lot about care homes, but the majority of people with dementia live in the community in England, certainly. And after that diagnosis, there's a lot of emphasis on helping people to get a diagnosis and getting people to go earlier in their journey. So that means people are living longer with that diagnosis. But certainly in the UK, we don't have any ongoing support. Dementia isn't seen as a long-term condition. So, you know, if you were diagnosed with cancer, you might get a Macmillan nurse or someone that follows you up, or regular appointments. That there is no model like that in the UK for dementia. You get your diagnosis and then you're left to come back till it, you know, when it's worse. And so people have a real crisis of identity, and you know, particularly if people have had dementia in their families and they know what's coming and they're worried about things. I think at that point, that sense of clarity and who you are and who you are in the world, I think that would be a huge benefit to people as well, to have that time, and you know, to connect with someone, I think would be really, really valued by a lot of people. Because a lot of people, when I used to work in a memory clinic and you'd give that diagnosis, would say, well, what can I do? What can I do now to help, you know, to help stop this getting worse? And we could say, you know, there isn't anything you can do in a sense, because it is a progressive illness, but we can tell you how to make it worse, which is, you know, to sit at home, to not see anyone, basically be in lockdown, isn't it? Sit at home, not see anyone, don't do all your activities, you know, don't have any social stimulation. And people are desperate to do things, and there's a real lack of resources to direct people to say, try this, and people are desperate. And particularly in the early stages, we know that people have the motor changes much earlier than the cognitive changes. And so a lot of people are managing changes in gait and balance, you know, very, very early on in their dementia, and that often gets missed, you know, and people are really struggling with that.
Uli, you wanted to say something else?
I wanted to say that especially also for the care workers, it would be very, very helpful if they could learn how to inhibit and how to move slowly and to feel their back when they are touching the people, or just become conscious of themselves when they go to people and touch the people. That would be very, very helpful. Or to enter a room, how to enter a room. You know, they rush in the rooms and they throw themselves to the persons, and so it's really hard. It's really hard. And they don't know nothing about it. It's no fault, you know. But it would be very helpful if they could learn a little bit of, how to use themselves a little bit better.
Thank you. That's there's obviously a lot in that. We have a question from Nick. Do you want to ask that? Nick, unmute yourself.
I'd just like to say I'm really finding this really, really interesting, and hearing everybody sharing their experiences. I don't have this experience. My mother does have dementia. But I would just like to ask a question to Charlotte. I watched 4 of the videos. I didn't watch the last 2. And I was like really, really impressed, Charlotte, with when you talked about the results with the people. It was just amazing. And it made me wonder, you did that during 6 weeks. And I was thinking, well, that's incredible, in 6 weeks. And so I wanted to ask you how I think you were talking about 4 people, how much time you actually spent with each person in that project, or whatever it was that you did for those 6 weeks, because I was wondering how that actually worked out, how much time you actually spent with each person to get that, whatever, you know, in that, what you were doing there.
Well, it was very variable. I mentioned in the videos how the life of the home was kind of unpredictable. So I think my original plan was to do something like, you know, ideally about 15 sessions of half an hour. But in the end, all the 4 participants got between 11 and 13 sessions of between 10 and 35 minutes. So some of the sessions were literally 10 minutes, and some of them were, you know, longer, more like a normal sort of half an hour, 35-minute Alexander lesson. So that's the kind of amount of time that they got. 11 or to 13 lessons of 10 to 35 minutes. I tended to have a bit longer with the residents than with the carers, probably for obvious reasons. The carers were often sort of between duties and things, so it was often quite short, but they were relatively young, relatively fit, just needed a little time, you know, get them in and out of a chair a few times, you know, off they pop kind of thing, bit of conversation in between, and that was enough to remind them probably and to have an effect.
That was over 6 weeks. That would be like more or less like twice a week.
Twice a week, that's right. Yeah, that kind of,
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's really interesting, yeah. I'd imagine it would be more, yeah. Fantastic.
Can I ask a question, Charlotte? Because although you weren't teaching them necessarily, kind of picking up on what Nick was saying, you were in the home for... Were you in the home for more of that time? I suppose what I'm really asking is, if you teach someone in not very much time, but you're around, you're, you know, using yourself in a particular way, you're using inhibition and direction, does that kind of impact on the people, kind of boost the work you've done individually with them, would you say? Do you see what I mean?
Kind of, yeah.
With good use around, does that...
Well, it's a very interesting question. That, well, yeah, the study was only over 6 weeks, and the carers I worked with for 6 weeks, the residents for 4 weeks, really. That's how it worked out. But I was there every day, not all day, every day. I was there visiting my mum and spent a bit of time doing my project as well, as it were. But a couple of residents actually said to me things, or actually said to me things like, I mean, one of them said, "Oh, it's lovely to have you here, and you know, you make such a difference." And I said, "Well, yeah, it's a bit of a shame, Mum, because this is when after the project, I said I only really work with my mum." And he said, "It doesn't really matter." He said, "It makes a difference." And I think he meant something about the calm, if you know what I mean. And another time, there was a woman who was very, very, she used to sort of say things, the same things over and over and over again. It was mostly her name and address. She'd obviously been somebody who used to wander off, you know, leave the house and get lost. So she'd say, "I'm so-and-so and I live at so-and-so and so-and-so." So she just said this all the time. And one day I was sitting with my mum in this room, and so she came and sat with us, and I was sort of sitting there giving my directions and holding my mum's hand, and you know, it was all nice and calm, and this woman just stopped this incessant talking, and she just kind of settled down, and then we started to have a really normal conversation. The phone rang in the room. She said, "Oh, shall I get that, or will you?" You know, and it was just like she just calmed right down, and I think that was just being there, if you know what I mean, without even touching. It was just, there's a presence, I think, with an Alexander teacher that can help, and maybe that's conveyed perhaps to people outside the lessons as well. I don't know. Yeah, but it's an interesting point. Yeah.
Thank you. We are getting to the end of the hour. I'm aware there are, you know, a few people who haven't said anything, and you don't have to. I just wanted to make sure that everyone who wanted to say something has said something, and also the if I pass it to Charlotte to say what, you know, where we might go from here, because that might be a question that some people have. So Charlotte, do you want to do that? And then if anyone else wants to say something, can you just put your name in the chat, and we'll just pick up before we finish. So it's kind of, where are we going from here, Charlotte?
Yeah, well, Emma and Leslie and I are all involved in doing various things, bits of writing and analysis and stuff. I'm very happy to say I've got a paper coming out. It's now been confirmed. It's coming out in March, April in the Journal of Dementia Care. And Leslie and Emma are both involved in writing projects from the STAT survey. So there's lots happening. We're hoping that this can become a fairly regular feature, and we'll send out, you know, periodic blogs or videos, and maybe have more live Q&As. I don't know, depending on appetite, but we see this very much as an ongoing project. We got contact with the Poise project, Leslie, haven't we, from and thinking of sort of doing more work in dementia. So I think there's lots of ways that we can go, and we just hope that there's more and more interest and appetite, and things will take off from here. But I'm sure Leslie and Emma may well have other things they want to add on their own accounts. I don't know.
I think the only thing I'd add is that we have, well, last year, I can't work out what year is what anymore. Emma and I did put together with others a bid for some money, but the funding got pulled because of COVID. And you know, when things settle a bit, I think we'll be looking to try and get some funding to explore using Alexander technique in with people with dementia, with carers. And I suppose that hopefully the thing is that we're gathering information all the time about the work that is going on, because the really interesting thing is there's lots of work around the world. People are working with people with dementia, and if nothing else, we've managed to kind of gather some of that information. We hope we'll get it published, and it can form the basis of ongoing work.
Great, thank you. Emma, do you have anything that you've got that's coming up that we can know about, other than the current project?
No, I guess just to say that, you know, I am here, and if anyone has any questions about people with dementia or dementia more generally, you know, at all, and I can be of any help in answering any questions, and I'm more than happy to. As you know, if this is something people are, you know, interested in, or working with people with dementia, if I can offer any help in that, then I'm very happy to.
Great, that's really good, really helpful. Thank you, everybody.
You've recommended a book there as well.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. Just if people are interested, it's a really interesting one. It's written by a lady living with dementia, called Someone I Used to Know. I encourage all our families to read this to kind of get that insight into what it might be like and enter someone's world a little bit. It's really insightful.
Great. I don't know whether we can save the bit of chat. Can we? Do we know that? We can, can't we? So we can, those things won't be lost, is, you know, if you haven't taken down the books that have been recommended. I think that can be saved as a file in some way. Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, everyone, for attending. This, as you know, is our first venture into something like this. So if you'd like to give us any feedback, that'd be really helpful. Just drop me an email. You know, good or bad, we'll learn if you tell us stuff that we've not got right, and we'll just feel happy if you send stuff that we have got right. So it works both ways. Thank you ever so much for coming along. And yeah, watch this space. And, you know, we'll be doing more stuff on ASO. So if you've all signed up for that, you'll yeah, see all the good stuff we've got coming out with any luck.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you all.
Everybody.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks,
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.